name's Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledev, and I'm here to continue on for my card review of the cards coming from the Rastakhan's Rumble expansion. Now, for clarification, I kind of had a few days off due to holiday celebrations and such, so we're going to catch up on a lot of spoilers that happened. Like, this review is going to cover over 20 cards that got revealed. That's a lot. So I'm going to go through some of them relatively quick, the ones that I know that I can go through quick. We'll talk on the ones that I do think worth discussion and such, but overall, just to say it real quick, my review stands from either amazing, which means a card that will most likely see competitive play and play in the ladder. Good is a card that I would say you could try in the ladder and be relatively alright. It's decent, it's alright. Not that great, but are cards that essentially have very detrimental weaknesses, but if you tailor your deck right, you could take advantage of it, but the weaknesses are still noticeable. And bad, in general, are just cards that, well, I would not exactly recommend playing in Constructed. Sometimes it's good in Arena. We'll see at least one card that I'm going to give bad that I'll be like, well, except in Arena, it's decent. But we'll get to that once we get to that. Overall now, let's actually continue on to the review. First off is actually a Druid spell, Predatory Instinct. It's a 4-mana spell, rare, draw a beast from your deck, double its health. So it's a specific tutor spell that has a divine spirit attached to it. A 4-mana spell to draw a specific creature to target with a health buff is interesting. It could target cards like Witchwood Grizzly, which is really nice. Even Tarantus with this buff would be actually pretty absurd. There's even some people are thinking like charging Devilsaur, etc., etc. Even some beasts that have Rush that are in the set. Undasta, etc. This card might be costly though, even in the Ramp Druid archetypes. And also, most of these archetypes like to play multiple beasts. So it's kind of weird to have one that specifically is like, we're going to target one beast and such. So it's kind of weird. And it's also in the 4th spot, which is kind of competitive at the moment for Druid, especially with ramp spells and all that stuff. However, there is a spell that's also coming up in the set that I'm going to talk about next that actually does synergize with this card relatively well. However, though, without that spell, just the card on its own, I'm going to say it's not that great, but if you really need a specific creature tutor in your deck, like I could see Hadronauts decks toying with the card, I don't think it's going to be an absolute include, but you can toy with it and see what happens. But overall, not that great, but next up, the spell that it surprisingly synergizes with is a 6-mana Druid spell, Stampeding Roar. It's an epic. Summon a random beast from your hand and give it Rush. Yeah, this card is absurd. This is a 6-mana, in my mind, summon Tarantus, which then you're going to make the argument, well, you're not going to have Tarantus in your hand all the time. Oh, wait, we have a way to tutor Tarantus out. We have a way, thanks to Predatory Instincts, to tutor out really big beast spells. And with that, we can use Stampeding War, in theory, to hopefully get a big kind of like tempo advantage. And in Hearthstone, having good tempo is really good. Even without Tarantus, there's still a lot of really big beasts you don't mind cheaping out with this spell. I think this might potentially start a new Spiteful Beast archetype. And even in general, just being able to get a beast out for cheap, giving it Rush to be able to trade in rather than it sitting still, that could just be good enough. I think it might potentially start a new archetype, or it might actually just be a good inclusion in, say, Quest Druid and such. I think this might be my bias talking. There's like 2 cards in this expansion where my bias is talking, but I think I'm going to give this amazing. Don't underestimate this card. This card is going to be a lot more annoying than people give it credit for. We'll see if it makes the deck a thing, like Big Beast Druid, or even just an addition in Quest Druid, but I feel like this is a really good power curve card for that deck. Next up, we're going to a Shaman spell, a 3-mana epic, Haunting Visions. And it is, the next spell you cast this turn costs 3 less, and you discover a spell. The fact that the spell, in general, helps you discount also cards that apply to spells in your hand, as well as a discovered spell, does give the card some versatility, which is nice. The catch with the card is, well, there's a lot of spells in Shaman at the moment, and There's some good ones, don't get me wrong, but there's also some really bad ones that you can choose off that might not overall benefit your overall game plan. Which is sad. Like, there are going to be times where you're going to get free one-cost spells, which is Earth Shock, Frost Shock, and I don't know, maybe just that 1/0 overload spell that just deals 2 damage to a random fiend and then you overload yourself 1. There's going to be circumstances like that where it's very awkward. Still, the benefit of this card is that you don't have to discount the shaman spell you discover. You could, in theory, just discount a volcano you have in your hand, or maybe a hex and such. And if you look at this as a way of just saying, hey, I need extra spell generation, but it would be nice that if I get that spell generation along the same turn when I play a control spell, then I think this is where the card has its versatility and has its power. Which is not that bad. Also, great card to pull from Hagavan's Hero Power. Still, I'm going to say never underestimate a card that can discount and offer spell generation, so I'm going to give this my rating of good. I think this is a card you can test in decks, and thanks to the Shaman Spirit, I think this card's going to see a lot more play than people give it credit for. Before we get to that, though, we're going to go to the next card that I got my notes on, which is a Merlok. Yay! Merlok Tasty Fan. 4 mana free 2. Death Rattle, draw 2 Merlots from your deck. Oh. Look, I love playing Merlot decks. It's one of my favorite archetypes to play once in a while. It's a fun archetype. And seeing potential new Merloks to try in the deck is always nice to see. However, with the current iteration of Merlot decks, this Merlok doesn't work with the general game plan in Merloks. Like, you want to have a big board presence by turn 4. You don't really want to play a slow 3/2 minion that you would hope that you can get card draw out of. Like, you're trying to win the game by turn 6, or even turn 7. You're not trying to win the game by turn 8 or turn 9. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if there are later in the meta, or even later in later expansions, there's powerful Merlots that you might want to tutor out, then Merlok Tasty Fan might actually see some play, since it could just work as a general tutor out a really powerful Merlok. And maybe this could just work just to tutor out a Merlok War Leader and a Gilfin, and just go into an aggro, minimal aggro, sub-Merlok strategy. But the problem is, if you're playing a Merlot deck, you're kind of going all in with it, and I feel like the current iteration of Merloks don't really want to play with this card. It's not that bad. I think you can still test in the deck, but I think most people are just going to test it and then cut it out. So overall, it gets my rating of not that great. It's not the worst card in the world, but I don't know if it's going to see much play. Next up is a Druid card, and we get the Druid Spirit, which is a 1 mana, which is pretty cheap, Spirit of the Raptor. It's a 0 free, stealth for 1 turn, like the spirits have, and it has the ability that after your hero attacks and kills a minion, draw a card. While this is kind of one of the least exciting spirits from the set, keep in mind it's 1 mana, and really all you need to do with this is just draw 1, maybe 2 cards out of it. It gets the job done. I could see this actually potentially being a card that Odd Druid might test out, because they have the 2 attack and they can easily trade into a minion and get the 1 card draw that you mostly are playing this card for. I don't know if this is going to quote-unquote generate the fight Druid as many people are curious about. We still need to see the legendary Loa from Druid to see if it actually encourages that archetype, since it seems like the spirits and the Loas have very heavy synergistic attributes, so that's a possibility. Still, I say this is just a decent... It has the same thing, kind of like how the Priest's Spirit has the benefit for being a 1-drop that's really hard to target. So if you're playing kind of like a buff Druid deck, you might actually just consider playing this just to be a cheap unit that you can buff later. And then if you trade in with your hero power, you get a card draw, which is nice. So in general, I'm going to give this card good. I think this is a card you can actually play. And as long as you get 1 card draw or 2, you'll be fine. If you get more, it's amazing, then the card's good. But I think it's good. I think it's a card you can test in Odd Druid, and it's not going to be the end of the world. Next up a weird card, but actually a really good card for Mage. It's the Arcanosaur, aka an elemental dinosaur, which is pretty awesome. It's a 6-mana 3/3 that has the battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, deal free damage to all other enemy or to all other minions, and it's a free. Yeah, it costs more than Dustbreaker. We all know that. Everybody's saying that. But remember, Dustbreaker is considered really busted. And even then, this battlecry has some very good synergies within Mage. Like, Mage do play Elementals, and Mage has, like, Death Knight Jaina, which then, hey, you can do a board life late game and get a major health boost. It's kind of like a Barugeddon. So, just because of that, the card's actually pretty decent on its own. Now, the one catch is that it is a teeny unintuitive with the battlecry, because it's like, okay, usually when you play Elementals, you want to play it for board control, so having to play an Elemental, and then having that Elemental board wiped by Arcanosaur seems a little unintuitive. I'm not going to deny that. It's silly, but I do think the card is perfect for the archetypes it's going to be played in. Like, if even Elemental Mage is a thing, maybe they'll play this card. I could even just see Elemental Mage in general just toying with the card because, well, it's a board wipe, and as I say, and I'll say again, Mage can't have too many board wipes in this meta, with all the zoo running around and all that. Presuming that the meta doesn't change with the rotation and such, so overall, I'm going to give this card good. I think it's a card you can actually play in the Mage deck that you know you want to play this in, and it's just a decent... I would say it's a decent one-of. Maybe it could be played as a 2-of, but it's a decent one-of in Elemental Mage. Next up, a new Paladin weapon, the forgive me my pronunciation of this, the Faraki Battle Axe, a 5-mana free weapon to give a minion in your hand +2/+2 is the overkill trigger. So, if you kill a 2-health minion with this, then you can give a minion in your hand +2/+2. I'm guessing it's going to be random. While the stats on the weapon are debatable for a 5-drop, the overkill trigger is actually a pretty nice effect. It could potentially be powerful in a mid-range or even a control paladin deck. The problem is, without a weapon buff per se, getting the overkill effect by turn 5 will be tricky without either trading or spells. Equality, Shrink Ray, etc. Still, if you need a card for a wild buff hand paladin, it's not a bad card to try out. But overall, I'm going to say it's not that great. But I could see some buff hand paladin decks in wild testing the card out just to see. But there are cons to the card. I mean, a free for 5 mana, even with that good overkill effect, is pretty steep. No denying that. Next up, we get actually the Priest Legendary Troll Champion, which is Princess Talanji. It's an 8-mana 7/5 that has the battlecry, summon all minions from your hand that didn't start in your deck. While there is potential to combo this card with Zombie and the Spirit of the Dead minion drawn, as probably has already been mentioned by previous reviewers and such, this is also a card you could try into Thief Priest shenanigans, like with Thought Steal, Cloning Device. It even just makes Cloning Device and this on turn 10 kind of an interesting play, especially if you can get like a very late game minion from the opponent's deck. Like, let's say Magical Christmas Land, you get a Deathwing, and then you play this and you summon this in Deathwing, which is a decent stat play. And priests do have Thief cards that they don't mind playing, like the Elemental, the Glimmer Root, I think is the name of the card. But also one thing to keep in mind, and I think many people are not keeping this in mind because they're going all into the Thief Priest route. Priests and all general classes in Hearthstone do have access to neutral minions that do summon cards that don't start in your deck. Like Total Shell Racer is one I could think of right off the bat. Heck, maybe even Ysera with the minions that it generates. I could go on, even Bone Dragon. So, you can build your hand up other methods rather than using the Thoughtsteal Cloning Device plan, and still play decent cards that you would play in your deck, like Total and Shell Razor always sees play, as well as Bone Drake, mostly in Arena, but who knows. If a Dragon Priest could be a thing, which I think it's going to be more of a thing this post-rotation, you could actually see that being thrown in. and just throwing this in to just get those minions out early, it's actually a potentially very powerful card. Still, it is a little clunky, especially when sometimes you might just want to play the minions rather than wait for Princess Talandri to get them all out. With that in mind, I'm just going to say the card is good. I think it can be played in Priest without a sweat and get toy with it, but it's not going to be a card that I think it's going to be day one competitively viable. I could be wrong, but I'll be fascinated to see if it does. Next up, we get to a Shaman card, which, oh boy, this one's absurd. It's the free mana Spirit of the Frog. It is a 0-free stuff for 1 turn, as we mentioned before, and it has the ability that whenever you cast a spell, draw a spell from your deck that costs 1 more. Okay, I think it's safe to say whenever I say a card's absurd, it's going to get the amazing rating, but let's just explain why this card is absurd. The card draw engine that this card provide is just really, really good. I mean, the ability to use this card to draw specific cost spells out of your deck gives Shaman a really good tutoring ability with this card in play. I mean, imagine like Haunting Visions, which I said the card's alright, but imagine it saying, oh, thanks to a Spirit of the Frog, you can play Haunting Visions on turn 4, tutor out, thanks to Spirit of the Frog, your heads, and heads a minion that you might find problematic. And then there's just little other ones like that, like maybe you have it on the field and you cast a 4-cost spell, then draw your Volcano. Just the ability of this card to tutor out specific spells at the right time, depending on your hand, can make this card very, very powerful. Now, yeah, it is prone to board wipes, don't get me wrong, but I still feel like it's kind of the same thing as I say with the Spirit of the Raptor and cards that are similar to this. As long as you draw 1 to 2 cards out of it, it's fine. It's one of those where I think many people are going to best case mentality, kind of like with the Trump reveal video. It's like, I'm going to draw all the spells and get potentially lethal. And yeah, you will have instances where that will happen, which is hilarious. But I think just as best just to look at this as... excuse me there. Just look at this as kind of like how we look at the totem that's in Shaman that I always get the name of that draws a card at the end of the turn. As long as you draw 1 card out of it, then it's perfectly fine. Still, the fact that you can draw a specific card makes this card amazing. I mean, this card will see play in competitive. It's really absurd. I mean, yeah, the stats are not great, but the fact that you can tutor out specific cards, I think people will tutor their decks and tailor their decks around this card, because just the ability to tutor out specific cards at specific times is a very powerful ability in Hearthstone. Don't underestimate that ability. Next up, we go from a really exciting Shaman card to one that's not really that exciting. It's the Totemic Smach, a 1 mana common spell, deal 2 damage, overkill, summon a basic totem. Okay, while you're probably not playing this card for the overkill effect, I would be surprised if you are, you will probably play this card because it's another 1-cost spell to target the opponent's face, which will help Malygos Shaman out a lot. People been trying to make Malygos combo Shaman a thing, and the fact that they now have another 1-cost spell that they can deal damage to the opponent's face can actually help them with their lethal, especially using cards like, I forget, it's the one from Boomstay, which is a 6-mana spell to summon a minion from your hand, and I always forget the name of the card. So, and then that, and then just use 4 deal damage face spells, and then just hopefully get lethal. But still, if you need to, using this spell for control spell is not bad either. And it's not a bad card to get from Hagvar. It's really just a simple card. If you need a shock in your deck, or if you just need another damage-based spell in your deck, then you'll probably play this. And overall with that, I'm just going to give it good. It's a good card. Next up, a card that many people are kind of on the fence of whether this is amazing or this is bad. It's the Grim Rally, which is destroy a friendly minion, give your minions +1/+1. While the card seems first unintuitive in zoo-based decks, like why do you want to destroy your minions, keep in mind the one thing that people seem to be forgetting. You can attack with the minion that you are about to destroy, which means you can still deal the damage that you want to do in a zoo-based deck with. And then you don't mind destroying it, and then hopefully getting a really, really big stat buff with a +1/+1. like many people are pointing this out that are being plus on this card, in some instances, in some specific zoo matchups, this is a power overwhelming. And then power overwhelming in zoo decks are really, really powerful. Now, the problem is the power overwhelming stats are going to be distributed among minions, and you do have to have a wide board for this card to be potentially very effective. So, but the thing is, Zoo in Warlock at the current iteration can get those wide board states without a sweat. So I'm going to say this card will probably see play. I don't think it's an auto-include. I think the card is overall good. I don't think it's bad as many people have been saying. It also even has the potential to be amazing because the factor that stat boost can potentially provide lethal. And I think you just have to look at this card like that. This is essentially 1 mana. Can I get lethal this turn? Okay, I'm going to use this spell so I can get lethal in the turn. It's going to be more as a finisher rather than a use for trade or mid-range. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So overall, card is good. Next up is the legendary Loa for Warrior, which is Akali the Rhino. An 8 mana 5/5 beast. It has Rush and Overkill, and the Overkill effect is draw a Rush minion and give it +5/+5. Well, this is a card that can help Rush Warrior out. I mean, there are some absurd Rush minions that drawing and giving a stat boost is quite good. Like Vicious Scalehide would actually be very decent with a +5/+5 boost at turn and costing 2 mana with a +5/+5 boost. There's also cards like Ciliat. I always forget it. I can't remember if it's Gilneas. I think it's Gilneas, which is the Witchwood legendary warrior card that from the Witchwood that I always forget his name. That was a hero in the single player adventure mode. I always forget his name. But still, spending 8 mana for a 5/5 does seem a little steep, so don't get me wrong on that. But there are ways to cheap it out, like with Undasta and such, and I think it's a fine card to test out in Rush Warrior type decks, or maybe even Control Warrior type decks that have a Rush package, or even just mid-range Warriors. I overall think it's just a good card. It's definitely one of the least exciting Loas, but just because it's not that exciting does not mean it can be potentially good. Which, yeah, this card's good. It will probably see play if Rush Warrior is a thing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see this card's shenanigans, in my personal opinion. Okay, next up is the another Warrior card, which is the Overlordswip. A free mana 2/4 weapon. After you play a minion, deal 1 damage to it. So, at worst, this is a 2/4 weapon, which is not horrible. It can potentially be used in aggro decks to deal 8 damage. The problem is, you gotta keep in mind high durability weapons don't see much play. And the main reason is because especially early game weapons like this are prone to weapon hate, which is popular in the meta, so that's something to keep in mind. Though the effect for it is actually pretty nice. It can be especially used with minions with damage matter effects, Returning Rovers, Hellscream, Acolyte of Pain, etc. And it'll probably see play in some decks just for that aspect alone. Probably not this standard, mostly because we have Blood Razor, just that gets that job done without a sweat. So overall, I don't think you'll see play right away, but I do think overall this is just a good card. It will see play in the decks that want this pain matter effect, or just may even just simply want a weapon that they can deal 8 damage with. Simple as that. Next up, one of the more weird cards that got revealed. It's the new neutral legendary, which is Griff Death. A 4 mana 4/5, so Yeti stats, that has a battle cry, discover 2 cards. Give 1 to your opponent at random. You know, I'll say it like this. At first, this card looks bad. And I mean really, really bad. But the more thought I put into it, this card's design is actually pretty cool. This is kind of the closest thing that you can get of, as they say in game theory, not game design theory, more economic game theory, the Prisoner's Dilemma. Go Google it. It's actually pretty fascinating. It's the closest thing you can get to designing Prisoner Dilemma within a card design, which is actually fascinating. And one thing that is confirmed is that the cards you discover are going to be neutral cards. Why they didn't put that in the text box, probably because they wanted to make sure it sounds like fit the text box and all that stuff. But yeah, the cards that you will have access to are neutral cards, which is a lot, and it can be varied, which the variants can be very problematic. Still, at worst, it's going to be pretty much a Mechanical Yeti, and if people remember, Mechanical Yeti did kind of see play. Yes, it was a mech, and mech mattered during the times when Mechanical Yeti see play, there is that. But I think the way you have to play with this card is kind of like how you play with Mechanical Yeti, in the sense that both of you are just getting cards that are not that amazing, but they're not that bad. Like, I think that's the way you have to play Grifter. When you get choices, don't get greedy. Like, just get choices that will overall help your game plan. And make sure that the choices that you get are ones that you can still answer if the opponent gets it. Like, don't go greedy and be like, oh, I'm going to get the 2 legendaries. And then you have to be like, well, what are you going to do if your opponent gets the 1 legendary that you want and such. I think this one, you just have to look at it as just get an average card. Which, yeah, I don't think it's going to be competitively viable just because of that factor alone. But I still think it's a fun card you can play in ladder. I'll be surprised to see its competitive play. Like, some people have been pointing out that this is a weird semi-counter to Mechafoon. Which, yeah, it kind of is, but it's not the greatest counter in the world. Overall, though, I think the card is good. I think it will see some play. It's not that bad of a card once you kind of think over it, and I do kind of love the design aspects of the card. It's one of the more fascinating design cards from the set. Next up is another legendary. This one is the Druid's Legendary Champion, which is a free mana War Druid Loti. And it has the ability to choose one, transform into one of Loti's 4 dinosaur forms. So, when you play this minion, you choose one of the forms, which, to go through them real quick, and I'll try to provide a picture caption right next to this, it's either a free mana 1-2 with Poisonous and Stealth. You could also get a 1-4 that has spell damage. You could also just have one that's a 4-2 with Rush. Or you can have a 1-6 with Taunt. And also one thing to keep in mind, this does have a Fandrhal ability where if you play this with Fandrhal on the battlefield, then it will become a 2-6 with Taunt, Rush, Spell Damage, Poisonous, Stealth, etc, etc, etc. Versatile units in general are nothing to sneeze at. It could synergize well with Itsland and Cube, and it's a beast, well, beast when it transforms, so beast mana synergies can apply to this card. And the main con of the card in general is the 4 forms that the card transform into are in general not that exciting, or at least at the moment don't feel that constructed playability. Most of the time. Still, who knows? I mean, I think most people, when they play this, they'll probably be playing the spell damage so they could do turn 7, like, a very efficient swipe or something like that. But there's still versatility in the other forms, and versatility... Never underestimate the power of versatile cards in some classes, and Druid did kind of need a free drop, so... Yeah, I think this is a good card. I'm not sure if it's going to see competitive play per se, but you could probably play it in ladder without a sweat, and it probably, as long as you build your deck around it, or at least know that this card is a card you can play, then it's fine. Next up is a Hunter spell, which... Oh, boy, this card is... Yeah, it's absurd. It's a free mana Call of the Master. It is a free mana, discover a minion from your deck, and draw all 3 cards if they are beasts. So, if you don't have more than 3 beasts, or if you have something that's not a beast that's in your deck, and you have that when you cast this spell, then you just discover the 1 minion and you draw it from your deck. This card is a great card for Hunter. While it doesn't fit the current archetypes as well, this is going to be a must-play in Beast Hunter, which is a popular archetype. And just tutoring for 1 card is fine, but the fact that you can use this to tutor and essentially draw free cards from your deck, like Savannah Highmane, King Crushus and such, which then thins your deck out more, this card is a steal. Never underestimate the power of card draw in Hearthstone. It is really powerful. The only con with the card is that It could be at sometimes maybe potentially too slow in Hunter, but I highly doubt that, especially with the potential value that you're getting from drawing free cards. Free specific cards that you had put in your deck for specific reasons. I'm pretty sure this card will see play in Hunter deck, it's just absurdly good. So overall, it's an amazing card. It will see competitive play most likely. Wow, Hunter is just getting all the good cards in this set. Like, I haven't really seen a bad Hunter card yet. Yeah, this card is absurd. Next up is the... Wow, I'm sounding like a broken record saying a card's absurd, a card's absurd. But lucky enough, this one is not absurd. It's the 7-mana 7/4 dragon Crowd Roaster that has a battle cry if you're holding a dragon, deal 7 damage to an enemy minion. While the stats are not amazing for a 7-drop, the fact that you get what basically amounts to spot removal for a majority of late game threats is nothing to sneeze at. Many people point out, well, you can't kill Lich King. No, but you can still kill a lot of things that are not Lich King, and you probably still will have minion presence, so you can trade into Lich King and still use this as removal. Dragon Deaths will probably play this card alone just for the spot removal aspect of it, and Dragon Warrior seems more playable archetype the more cards we've seen from it, and they're probably going to play this card just the factor that it's just a 7/4 that can remove something. It's not amazing, but mostly it's just practical, and practical cards do see play most of the time. So overall, this card's good. Next up is the Big Bad Voodoo, a epic shaman spell, 2 mana, give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon a random minion that costs 1 more. While the card is essentially what happens when Involve combines with Ancestral Spirit, with the new legendary shaman trolls in Teemo, there are some potentially silly applications. In ways, it's a lot better than Ancestral Spirits, since in theory, you can use the unit to trade and then hopefully get a better unit out of it, which could help you with board trade later game. The main catch is the card, though, has its variants, and there are some times where you're going to trade with your 5-drop with this enchantment on it, and it's going to turn into a really worse 6-drop. There are going to be times where that. It's also prone to silence. Still, one combo that I think people need to try with this card is playing Big Bad Voodoo on a minion and then playing Ancestral Spirits, so you both get the same minion as well as the new 1-cost better minion. I think that could be a potentially silly combo to test out. And by that combo alone, I think the card is good. I think it's something you can test in ladder without much of a sweat. And I think I'm going to get into one little side note here. I think when they watch reviews, when they say we hear a card is good, they think a card is competitively viable. I still want to make sure that I note this. Good cards are, to me, not competitively viable cards. Like, I don't think they're going to see play in tournaments. Good cards are cards that I believe you can just play in ladder without a sweat. Like, you can just play in a ladder match, or you can just play casually with your friends. Good cards are cards that don't have much detriment for trying them out. I don't say they're competitively viable. Just keep that in mind. I feel like when many people have seen me seeing cards like, for example, what was that random legendary? Oh, Griff Death's a good card. I think people are like, oh, this won't see tournament play. But keep in mind, what I'm saying is, I think it's just something you can play in ladder. So, just a little side note there before we get on to the next card. Next up is the Embuscale Drake, a 5-mana 5/5. If you're holding a dragon, gain 5 armor. This card is a really great addition for Warrior. A 5/5 that generates armor is actually really good. Also, it's odd, and believe it or not, Ad Dragon Warrior can be a thing, and they would not mind this card. Also, it's just a great addition for Dragon Warrior in general. Dragon Warrior seems to be the more plausible each time I'm seeing new cards for it. So overall, I think this card will see competitive play, so I think it's amazing. Quick, to the point. Next up, the Bloodscap Strategist, a 3-mana 2/4 battlecry if you have a weapon equipped, discover a spell, a Hunter card. Well, this is probably one of the quote-unquote worst Hunter cards. Still, it's a really good card, which is kind of, It's a really good card for Hunter. The power level of the card is due to the factor that within at least current standard, they have Counter Shot in the meta. So being able to discover a spell really early in the game is actually pretty good. The stats are decent, and in general, Hunter spells are really powerful. Yeah, there's some bad ones, don't get me wrong, but in general, you're probably going to get one that you want. Plus, it's card draw and Hunter, and card draw and Hunter is not bad. It could see play in Secret Hunter, and maybe even a mid-range Hunter list. I think the card is a little bit underrated. It's a little absurd. It might be less effective post-rotation once we don't have one-cost weapons, though. Still, though, I think the card is amazing. I think the card will see play competitively, in my personal opinion. Next up, Elemental Evocation, a 0-mana spell. The next elemental you play this turn costs 2 less. Okay, this card seems a little underwhelming at first glance. I mean, it's technically prep for elementals, which doesn't seem exciting at first, but the card does have some strength. I mean, to put an example, with this card, you can play Tar Creeper on turn 1, which in some matchups is kind of absurd. The tempo advantage you can get by getting some elementals out early than they are can be pretty powerful. The question is whether or not tempo advantage is worth a card slot, which I can see some people saying no, but I'm going to make a slight argument that I think yes. I mean, there are some elementals that getting them out turn 2 or early seems kind of absurd, or even earlier, like Servant of Calamos, Blazecaller, etc. And one of the main cons of the card is, well, it's a spell, and most elemental decks like to be minion-centric, especially with the draw spells that are in Mage and such that are very minion-centric, like Book of Specters and all that stuff, so them putting a spell in their deck is not that intuitive. Still, I think it's a card that can see casual play in ladder and maybe competitive play. Maybe. It depends on if there's like an absurd elemental that you want on turn earlier than you can play it. So it's a maybe. Plus, it's just a cheap spell, which could interact with spell interaction like minions, like that Raven that generates a minion every time you cast a spell, Mana Worm, etc. So overall, I say the card is good. Next up, it's the Sightless Ranger, a 5-mana free 4 with Rush, Overkill, summon 2 1/1 bats. Okay, we never really went to about the fact that I was going to say that some cards are bad, but at least they're good in Arena, or at least decent in Arena. Yeah, we're going to get to it. It's always good to keep an eye out on cards with both Rush and Overkill. However, the Overkill trigger is alright. Not amazing, but alright. And if you get 2 Overkill triggers, then the card can be potentially pretty silly. But I think you would be lucky enough to get 1 trigger off it, personally. However, I think this is just a card that won't see much constructed play. I think it's detrimental to put it in constructed decks, even with the Akali Warrior decks. However, I do think it's a good arena card, though, because it is a way to be used both as a spot removal and board presence, which is actually pretty good in arena. If there's a deck that takes advantage of the bats, then it probably might see some ladder play. I would be very surprised to see its constructed play, though. It's alright, it's not amazing, but the more I think about it, the more I'm going to say this card is bad. Still, decent arena card. I just don't think you'll see much play in constructed, though. And, whew, the last card that we're going to talk about before we get done with this video today is Captain Hooktusk, an 8-mana sits-free legendary minion. So this is the legendary troll warrior for Rogue. It's a sits-free with a battle cry, summon 3 pirates from your deck, give them Rush. Including, this should also say that it gives herself Rush, so keep that in mind. So, yeah, the card's ability to thin out your deck and build a board's presence is pretty nuts. It kind of reminds me, in some instances, Mysterious Challenger from the Grand Tournament. Like, not as great as Mysterious Challenger, but it reminds me of that. Because the ability to take 3 cards out of your deck and thinning it out is pretty good. And the only catch with the card is, well, there are many people that are wondering if you can make a mid-range pirate deck with the current pirate package, or with the current pirates we have so far. And while I am not sure it can be a primary package for a deck, I do think it can be a sub or secondary package for a deck that might want to thin their deck out. Like, the one I can think of right off the bat is Academic Espionage Rogue. They always like to empty their decks out relatively quick so that they can fill it up with Academic Espionage and try to get the tempo advantage from Academic Espionage. And I think the strength of this card is going to be the factor that with Ticket Scalper, ironically enough, and having that package itself to being able to both thin your deck out with the with those pirates that come out of there, as well as being able to draw cards thanks to Ticket Scalper. That's a way to get your deck thinned out really, really quick, and still build a board presence, which is nice. So I don't think a pirate deck is going to be happening because of this legendary, but I do think a pirate package can be put into a deck that wants to thin their deck out relatively quick. And just by that aspect alone, like I said, this is going to be the second card where I think I'm being a little biased, but I think this card's nuts. I think it will see competitive play most likely. If there was a way to make Acti-Gimmick Espionage competitive, it's going to be this card's package alone. So overall, it's amazing. I think this card is really, really good. And whew, we finally went through all the cards and catched up with all the cards that got revealed so far. Hope you enjoyed this video. You all have a lovely night, and, well, let's hope this expansion gives more amazing and potentially nutty cards. See you all later. This is Griff Death, signing out. Ba-doop.